Welcome back to this course on Python, and today we will look at what is object-oriented, an introduction. So what is object-oriented programming? Well, it's a paradigm, an approach to how we model the real world in a programming language. It is very different to what you've learned in the past, which has been what we called procedural programming, i.e. things follow in order. In here, we're going to be looking at objects, classes, methods, and attributes, all part of the core concepts of object-oriented programming. So a class is kind of like a template, which has a set of methods or standard methods, attributes, and initial states, which we apply and use to create objects. So therefore, an object is effectively an instance of a class. And within an object, you'll have many methods or actions which they can perform and do, and they also have attributes or properties which they contain, which we'll look at in shortly. So now we have all these types of methods. How do we apply it? And one example I'm going to look at is using my garden. So welcome to my garden. So like all gardens, that they are standard class. All gardens will have a width and a length, may even have a type, owner, and these are all what we call properties and attributes. We also have a spade. Again, this is a generic class with generic properties or attributes, but this is my particular spade, so therefore it's an instance of the class spade, and it has specific things. So it has a length, a width, a height, a weight, and a colour. We also have the generic class for a chair, i.e. its width, its height, its weight, and its colour and its style. But this is my chair. This is an instance of garden chair. And again, we could have the generic class for a watering can. All watering cans are pretty much the same. They all have standard properties, but this is my watering can. This is an instance of the class watering can. It's green, it's 5 years old, and no, it doesn't have any holes. So what about methods? Well, a spade in the class, you can dig with a spade. And also with the chair, you can open and close it. That's as an action. And the watering can, as you have over here, has the standard methods pour and fill with water, but in this particular case there was no water in my watering can. And then of course, of all these objects in the garden, there's me. I am of the class human. All humans have the same properties. I'm an instance of that class, and that's me, with 2 arms, 1 brain and 2 legs, and my name is Graham. So I can run as a method in my class, and I can also sit. And if I put it all together, all these objects could sit in the same object as the garden object, my garden. Oh yes, and I forgot the badminton object at the end there. So now we're going to take the garden example and show you how to create these classes in Python. So if we take this bit of code here, we start with a program by using the class instruction, which basically says we are now creating a class. And in this example, we're going to call the class garden, followed by the standard colon. We then use a constructor method. Now this is the method that will be called when we instantiate the class, i.e. create an object from the class garden. This is the first method that will be called, with the following parameters. The self we use to say I'm going to define within this class some of the default variables, in this case width, length and type. And those default values will be set via the following parameters as part of the constructor method. So when those parameters are passed, they are then used to define or set the variables within the class garden, in this case width, length and type. So they are simply copying those parameter values across. So when the object is instantiated, it will have those default values. And just to show you here as a visualization of the garden class, garden with the following properties: width, length and type. Integer for width, integer for length and string for type. So let's look at the code in more depth. So we've got the class at the top, as I've just shown you, called garden, and we have the constructor method, and we then have the following properties set via the constructor method. So we look at the next line of code, which is line 8. So we instantiate, we create the object my garden using the class garden and the default parameters width, length and type, i.e. 12, 20 and home. So if you imagine this now has become an object as it's shown here above, called my garden, with the operate properties 12, 20 and home for the variables. Then we look at the print command, which will simply print whatever the type is, and then we look at the line 10 where we look at the different attributes that are going to be outputted to the screen using the my garden as the object that we have just created. So in the next line of code, line 12, again we're creating another object called garden2, which again using the same class garden. So instantiating class again with the default values 5, 2 and Japanese. So the width for 5, length 2, type Japanese. We then print the object property type, which in this case will be Japanese, and then we say the size of my garden is the width, which is a property of garden 2, and the length, which is a property of garden 2. So now if we run this program, you can see there from the first line, so that is the first object, the first garden object, which is home and has 12 meters by 20. And then we have the second object called garden2, which has the following properties. Now we're going to create some methods as part of our classes. And the first class I'm going to look at is the watering can. So let's take our watering can. So we have the class watering can with the following methods. So the first method we have is, starting from line 10, we have the constructor method, which basically initializes the state of the watering can. Then we have the second method, the fill method, which allows us to fill water into the watering can. And then lastly, we have the pour method, which will allow us to pour the water from the watering can. So let's have a look at this in a little bit more detail. So starting from line 8, as you can see there, we define the name of the class, in this case watering can. We then initialize the constructor method with the following values: color, max liters and water contained. So the maximum number of water you can have in the can, the color of the can and how much water you start off with. Then we're going to have the method fill, which will get the amount as a parameter, so how much water we're going to fill in the can. And then we're going to add that water to whatever's already contained within the watering can. And then we'll do a little bit of validation that says, well, if you put too much water in, then we're going to default it to whatever the maximum amount is in the watering can. In other words, we can discard the rest. And then finally we have the pour method, which again has the parameter amount, but this time on line 22 we are going to minus the amount from whatever's waters exists within the watering can already. And again we add some simple validation. If the water contained is less than 0, then we say ran out of water, and we default it to 0 because we can't take more away than less than 0. We're now going to run the program. So you'll see here the class garden that we defined earlier at the top of the program, lines 1 to 6, and then we've added the watering can class, as you can see. And in line 27 we're going to instantiate the watering can class with an object myWateringCan, using the default values green for the color and 10 for the max number of liters for that watering can. We then use the dot method to refer to a particular attribute or method from the object, in this case watering can, and we're going to refer to the color, which by default should be green because that's what we set it up as when we instantiated it. So then line 29, we do the same thing using the dot method to refer to the water contained, which by default should be 0. Colour green 0. The reason why it's default 0 because when we instantiated the class, you'll notice we automatically set the water contained value to 0. Okay, let's try some methods. So we'll try the fill method as one of the methods we've already added. So notice when we click dot, the IDE will give us a list of methods and attributes that we have defined in the program. So we just have to select one, in this case the fill method. And then I'm going to specify how many litres I'm going to fill our watering can with. In this case 7. Now I'm going to run the program to see if it actually does work. And we should get the correct values. So here we go, it's still green and it has 7 litres of water at it because we added it using the fill method, so that's how much water is contained. So let's now see if we can test if it overflows. So again, we do the fill method as we did before, and I'm going to try and fill another 7 litres, which obviously will exceed the amount. So when we run it, you'll see there we get the error too much water, and it has defaulted to 10 because that's the maximum amount that it contains. And you can see this in the code because when I go above water, it sets it to wherever the max litres is, and obviously I've made some amendments to the code there. Now let's try the pour method as the last method we've defined in our class. So again, we type in the name using the dot method and we refer to pour, and we're going to pour 2 litres. So we'll run this program and see what it will do. And you'll notice it has worked because 7 litres minus 2 litres will give me 5. Let's try test to see if our pour methods allows us to go greater or pour more water than we actually have. So this time I'm going to change that value to 10 litres. So we have 7 litres minus 10, which obviously is going to exceed. We've run out of water, but it will default back to 0. To summarise what we have learned, I will go over the main areas covered plus some extension tasks for developing the program. So to summarise the concept of object-oriented programming, it's a way of modelling real-life applications, and I used my garden as an example. We also looked at the classes, objects, instantiation, constructor and attributes and methods as part of the OO paradigm. And we looked at how we then create classes in Python and objects and methods, using the gardener as an example to illustrate the points. And then finally we looked at adding code within methods to do some sort of processing in terms of the program application. Now we could extend this program by going forward by perhaps looking at adding more classes in our program, so the spade, the chair, the badminton net and a human, and we could look at the methods for each one of those classes in terms of code and programming, and we could also look at adding all those objects within an object called garden, because we've instantiated the garden class to create an object. So next lesson we're going to look at some of these areas, namely inheritance, aggregation, association and composition.